Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I see that we've got a lot of people queuing into the room. So while folks are doing that, I want to welcome you. I'm Barry Norman from Expert Admissions. I'm joined by my colleague Tova Meyer, and we're also joined by our wonderful guest, Jordan Pascucci, who is Vice Dean and Director of Admissions at the University of Pennsylvania. And tonight we're going to be talking about college essays. We're going to be talking a little bit about admissions trends and just sort of the admissions process. And we got so many questions. Thank you so much for submitting them from registrants. And we'll also encourage you, if you have follow-up questions or questions that come to mind as we're speaking, to put them in the Q&A box, please, not the chat. And we'll moderate and kind of keep an eye on those as we go. So I think we still have a lot of people coming in, but we'll get started. And again, just put your questions in the Q&A, and thanks for joining us. So hi there, Jordan. We're so happy to have you with us.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here, and I hope that this is helpful to everyone spending their precious time tuning in.
Yes, and it's that time of year where people are starting or have started on their college essays. And so we thought this was the perfect topic, very timely, and one that a lot of people have a lot of questions about. And we know our goal and Penn's goal always has been to be more transparent and to help make the process clearer for students, families, counselors. And so we'd love to kind of dive right in and maybe sort of set the stage first, which
Okay.
if you could take us through kind of the back end of your review process, sort of, the life cycle of an application, and then we'll focus a little bit more on the essays and how they play a role.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna like back way up, maybe before people are gonna think start, because I'm not gonna start with August 1st, which is when the application goes live every year. But I'm gonna back up and rewind even like a year or months before that. And so like let's take this class of 2030 um, who will be applying this year. I know it always hurts my brain a little bit to think about that. But we started thinking about what would their experience be like to apply and what do we want it to be like August of last year and even before, right? And so we know several years out, sometimes it takes to like make incremental changes or test things or see how applicants respond to things or see if a change or tweak that we make actually does make things clearer or makes things more complex. And so we've been thinking about, this class applying for a long time. And we think about our process every year in terms of what is a sustain, what works really well, and what's changing about the higher education admissions landscape and enrollment management that demands that we make some modifications. And some good moments in history, I think, that pointed to that, right, was, during the pandemic, when the way that people spent their time and energy started to change. Well, we realized that that was a moment where you needed to really talk differently about what kinds of information you wanted to see from people, that was maybe not something that was traditionally seen as valuable in the process or encouraged, right? And then similarly, we think about, okay, well, what's the learning experience? What are the tools out there that are available to students? Like, how are students learning about colleges and universities, and how are they thinking about their future? And what does that say about how we need to word things, how we need to alter or amend our requirements to be able to get at the information we need to make our process work. And Penn's process is pretty unique in that so Penn founded committee-based evaluation, which is a model that many different institutions use these days. But at Penn, we've evolved this to keep up with historic volume, by realizing that every stage of the process has a different function. And what I mean by this is traditionally when people think about admissions, what they've heard about is there is a reader of that application And in some places, that reader reads your application materials cover to cover and then makes a summary and or a recommendation about what should happen to your application. That is very far from what happens at Penn. So at Penn, we have our, requirements, and these requirements are put in place to give us critical information that's used in committee-based conversations. And what that means is that there's never an application that is only reviewed by one person, and that it's being reviewed by multiple people, often with multiple people simultaneously accessing documents, talking about them, having a conversation. And when we receive information, we are making sure, okay, do we have what we need? Or is there something critical missing that we need to reach out for or alert the applicant to that it's missing, and then wait for that to come in. If we have it, then great. It's ready to have that preliminary conversation where our team of experienced evaluators are really asked, is there evidence that this student would be prepared academically for Penn? Are they competitive in that sense from being able to handle the curricula that's offered at Penn? And then is there a compelling case to be made as to why, with the limited spaces that we have available, they would help Penn achieve its goal of having a community of scholars that's based on wide-ranging interests, experiences, geographies, talents, you name it, right? And it's why in highly selective admissions, right, there's never going to be that one thing. And we are in the unfortunate business, right? It's the worst part about my job is that I'm responsible every year for turning away tens of thousands of incredible students who could be competitive and compelling. And so we, the first goal in our process is that our evaluators, which are all staff of the admissions office, they are having a conversation saying, does this application need another conversation? And sometimes the other conversation is because it's very clear that this is somebody we should consider for becoming a member of the Penn community, or there are questions that need to be answered, or we need a different perspective and we want somebody else to help us take a look at it, right? And then for some students, there's various reasons why they could be great students, there could be compelling pieces, but we just know that in the huge amount of applications that we have, this is not going to be an application that we need to have another conversation about. And in our process, right, in both of those instances, like, that work gets checked. We check that kind of for consistency because we have a large team. We make sure that like we are in agreement with, okay, we don't need another conversation about this application. And yes, we do need another conversation about this application so that we can get everyone to the right places. And at Penn, we have 4 undergraduate schools and then a few coordinated dual degree programs. And then by the time we have those conversations about arriving at an actual decision, students are in conversations that have everything to do with their academic interests and what their unique attributes are. And it has nothing to do with like the context of like their peers at the same high school that may have applied or anything like that. And I think that students often get worried about that kind of thing, but it truly is that there's not a sense where like anybody is ever holding up one application and another and saying this one or this one, right? It's you're discussing one young scholar at a time and appreciating like, okay, we've got a very serious task here and we have very limited space to do it, and what are we seeing here that is compelling for the job that Penn has put before us? So there's many checks and balances is I think what I'm also trying to convey, that there's many ways of being able to consider our work, to check in with people. It's a very human process. And I think that that would surprise people because they hear the numbers out there and they think, how could it possibly be? but it is. And so Penn, evaluates all applications in a committee setting where it's two people simultaneously. And then we discuss them for actual arriving at a decision where there's multiple people, including representatives from the school or program that they've applied to.
And what is the role when you're doing committee-based evaluation? What is the role of the essay, the main essay, and then the main essay relative to the supplemental questions that Penn asks? If you could speak a bit about that more directly.
Yes, and I think that, I'm here again to speak, and I'll tell you about the Penn process, but I do think that, again, this is something that varies quite a bit across schools. And from everything that I just described, I hope that you got the sense that this is a very active process and it's a conversation. And these are advisors, these are enrollment professionals, right? And that are part of these conversations. And we are looking to the personal statement, right? We refer to it more as like writing, like application writing or personal statement, simply because I think an essay reinforces the concept that this needs to be something super polished and you're getting graded on your writing skills. Whereas what's actually most valuable to our process is when we're learning information about you that's helping to fill in the picture. Like when your writing brings you into clearer and clearer and clearer focus, right? And so we often try to tell students that, think about if you were to meet a stranger and if you had to get them to get you, or at least understand you a bit as a human in a very short amount of time, what would be the few things you would say to them so that they understood you? That's the stuff that's got to be in your application. And so those are the things that often make a very good writing topic, a very good personal statement. Not necessarily something that's super formed, super polished, but this concept of if you want to know me, here are some of the things that you should know about me. Because it helps to kind of tie together the parts of the application. So I think that larger writing that you do for the application, I tend to think of it as that real gut check moment of a bad essay will not get you not admitted. And a great essay has never gotten anyone admitted. No matter how many times you read it in whatever media source, those essays that get published were not the thing that got that student admitted, right? They were part of a series of requirements that worked together to create a cohesive impression of someone. And so I think that when your writing is something that is consistent with the rest of the materials you're presenting, but not redundant, right? That's when it gives us actually something helpful.
I think
And then the
also,
supplemental questions, real quick, we ask them not because we want to create more work, but because they give us information that we don't get from anywhere else in the application. And that's why they're so important.
yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt before. I think there's a misconception also about, whether we're talking about the personal statement or even the supplements, but focusing on the personal statement is that sort of, Penn's this Ivy League school, super competitive, hard to get into. I've got to not only have the most polished sounding essay, so it doesn't even barely sound like a 17-year-old student, even a really smart one, but that I have to present myself as this sort of perfectly formed and
Right.
complete being, and I should focus on, my accomplishments and my academic interests because, you got to be really smart to get into Penn, and I want to show them just how smart I am. And that's not what we're going for, and that's not the goal. I always try to say the main essay is really the heart of the application. It's where the application turns into an applicant,
Yeah.
and if that's its role. And I would love for you to speak a little bit to that sort of idea of needing to impress and
Yeah.
kind of even in sometimes a gimmicky way, oh, this is what's unique about me, when in fact the things that tend to work are the things that we share in common, not the things that make you, what would might make someone stand out like a sore thumb or something.
Completely. You're making that makes me laugh a little bit because I can remember years in my career where either I knew that among private counselors that there must have been certain advice that was circulating in the water, because you would see all students starting to submit poems as their writing supplement. You were like, you're not a poet. Like, why are you doing this? Or, we'll look on, somebody will say, like, we'll be in an admissions committee and somebody will be like, can somebody look on Reddit and see if this advice is out there? And then sure enough, we'll find like a Reddit page about college essays where everybody's getting the same ridiculous advice. And they're all following it. And you're like, this is why we have so many essays about this topic. Okay. Because it made no sense otherwise. And so, yeah, I think that that's been, kind of around forever. And it is funny. I really appreciate you pointing out like the irony of like, college is supposed to be a time of growth. And what's the point of even going if you're already a fully formed human being? And I think that if you ask most adults to try to like think about applying to something today, they too would realize that like while there's achievements, they are still always a work in progress. And so more than anything, we're looking for students, and this is true for any college or university, I think especially at Penn because of Ben Franklin, which I'll get to in a second, but students who are willing to kind of like exhibit that growth mindset, because if you're not, then what are you going to get out of a place where your only job for 4 years is to take advantage of as many opportunities as possible, right? So you've got to display that sense of openness, that sense of like, I don't know, but I want to learn. And, the messiness, right? Because college, right, it's designed to be a safe place to fail, right? It's designed to be a place where you gather as much life experience as possible so that when you leave it, you are as prepared as possible for all of the uncertainties you'll encounter for the rest of your life, right? And, we always like to we joke a lot about Ben Franklin at Penn, but there is something really beautiful about somebody who was kind of like, look, I don't know anything more about this than the next person, but America needs a fire company. It needs a library company. It
The
needs a post
hospital.
office. Why not me? Right. It wasn't about the perfection. It wasn't about getting that exactly right and having no mistakes. It was about like, we have a phrase that we like to say where, when we stop pursuing perfection, we can perfect the pursuit, right? We can actually like get ready to realize that like I'm supposed to get roughed up a little bit. I'm supposed to like have be influenced by other people and influence other people. I'm supposed to grow and stretch during this time. And that's not always the most comfortable thing. So when students kind of present themselves as a fully formed or very like neatly wrapped up kind of thing, it's not that that's bad. It's just that that's probably not actually who they are on a day-to-day basis or how they're known. And so it ends up just simply being a missed opportunity, I think, in the application.
Yeah, that's I think a really helpful framing, Jordan. And I think, as Barry said, this sense of perfection, of polish, and there's such a fine balance between obviously not submitting your very first draft, not submitting something that is riddled with errors,
Right.
but at the same time making it making it super authentic. And yeah, the analogy I always used to use um, was, if you dropped your essay on the floor of your school cafeteria or the quad or whatever it is in your high school, and it didn't have your name on it, someone could pick it up and read it and be like, this is Jordan, this is Barry.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought like that, the way you described that was really, really powerful. Um, I think another thing that gets students really stuck is, they say, well, they say you don't have to be perfect or you don't have to be super polished. Um, and it's not about standing out. It's about being the work in progress. But like, I'm just an ordinary 17-year-old kid. Nothing crazy monumental has happened to me. I just go to school and do my thing, and that's who I am. How would you advise those students who feel like they don't have anything important or significant to write about, and who, I think sometimes this advice, even though I think we all mean it to be really helpful and really encouraging, can almost feel overwhelming of
Yeah.
like, well, you need to make something ordinary sound really exciting. So what is your advice to
Yeah.
help students tap into those things that make all of us special?
Yeah, no, there's no greater way to connect with somebody than over like just how hard it is to be human, right? Like, right, the human condition in and of itself has so much built into it that you don't really need to look far, right? And I think that many students, uh, 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 all right, so one profile that like we will see over like thousands and thousands of times over and over again, right, are students who are interested in some form of healthcare or STEM, and they have done research, and it's great, it's amazing, it's incredible research, and they think that that's going to be the most exciting thing, so they emphasize that a lot, right? They've got people to write recommendations about it, they write about it in their essay, they list it in their extracurricular activities, they list it in additional information, they send in a abstract, right? Now there's like all these pieces of the application that you only use to convey that one thing, right? And so it's kind of like a missed opportunity that we actually didn't get to learn. Well, yeah, but all right, if you're doing research in a lab, when you joke around with like your lab mates, like who do they know? Like when you're in the hallways and nobody's looking, who are you? Like that kind of thing. And students will like spend all this time like shadowing a doctor or something like that. Awesome, right? I get it. Like, you want to see what it's like. Is this really what you're interested in? You think it is, or you want to know more about it? Great. But medical school is like a multi-year commitment beyond the 4 years that you're applying to at college or university. So that kind of stuff actually isn't giving us a good sense of who you are now and who you are going to be for the next 4 years while you continue to figure this out, right? So I think that getting away from yourself and trying to be too committed to a profession, I always try to remind students that, for this generation, I think the statistic is something insane. Like by the time they're 40, they'll have like a dozen different jobs and half of them or more don't exist yet. Well, like, so the point is that like you need to prove more than anything that like you're open, you're nimble, you're excited about knowledge, you're willing to see where it carries you, right? And that's very different from what trying to be too put together will cause you to do in your application. So you're right, like that there's a difference between there's a there's a difference I think between like carelessness or like seeming like there's a lack of effort, right? Versus a in I hate to use the word authenticity, but it really is this sense of like, if you were to like treat this as a time capsule, would you look back and say, yeah, that's actually who I was at that time in my life? And the simple things are beautiful. Like there's a student who this year, it just stands out in my mind because she really wanted to be a stand-up comic. She was very shy and she wanted to work towards that someday, like to someday join like an improv group. But there was no way that she was just going to jump in and do it. And so what she did was she got a job as a busser at a comedy club and shared about like what that was like and listening to the acts and then how she would like, go home and in the mirror practice something. And there's just like very, very little day moments that like give a glimpse of how you think about the world and what gets your time and attention, right? She wasn't in a formal club about any of these things. She was just giving a lot of thought about it, right? So like it was a very current thing that was getting a lot of her attention, a lot of her time. She spent time thinking about it, but this wasn't a formal activity. This wasn't even a way that people knew her, but it was a way that like she maybe wanted to start to show more of herself, but yet that like dedication and commitment and way that she approached trying to get there was reflective of the way that people knew her and the way that she approached other things in her life. So it was just kind of interesting. Like, it's the little things that like if you're just honest about them, they actually can be perfectly revealing and stand out.
Tell a lot about you. Yeah.
I think, there's always this saying, things can be simple, but just because they're simple doesn't mean they're not actually really complex or
Right.
really layered, right? And so these are things that tell you something about them. I always, say like you're so what? You're smart. Like, okay, what are you going to do with it? Like, and how have you done things and how have you put that to good use? And, what do you make of it? And how have you struggled and all those things? I think there really is this focus on perfection and, the idea of, again, proving you're smart enough for a highly selective school, that people miss the more simple things that really are going to be more compelling and quite frankly, interesting. I don't mean anything, but I don't really need to hear that much about like, the research. I want to know about that it's happening, right? But
Right.
if I learn more about the research, I'm not necessarily going to really learn anything about you.
Yeah.
And it really gets to that. It's a
Yeah,
good,
I always say, students really spend a lot of time thinking about like who they are on like the award stage moments, but they don't give the thought to who they are in the hallway moments. And it's the hallway moments that actually make people stand out.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a segue to the supplemental questions, because there's a lot of talk about the college essay, and that is the one essay that goes, the same essay goes everywhere. And it is, usually the longest piece of writing for most students that they'll submit as part of this process. The supplemental questions, and Penn has some for all students, a couple for all students, and then school-specific ones. Can you share a bit of guidance about those questions, about the ones for everybody and even the school specific ones, and sort of how they're different, how they function differently in the review process, and the kind of information, let's say, you expect to get from supplements versus what you might get from the main essay?
Yes. So first and foremost, we went with short answer responses because they give us a much more candid, off the cuff kind of insight that we're going for. We don't want you to overthink these. Please don't overthink these. The other thing I would say is that if you Googled, how to answer the Penn gratitude prompt and you went anywhere but our own admissions website, you were probably led astray. And what I mean by
Including Reddit.
yeah, yeah, is there's a lot of bad advice out there, and like on the surface, so Penn asks 3 short answer questions, and one of the changes that I think that people, well, I don't know that you would notice them because you're only applying this year, but anyway, like one of the changes that we've made every year is and this year we've done I'm really proud of the job that we did on this, is we built in application advice. So when you get to any of the questions that are unique to Penn, we tell you why we are asking this. And we tell you like how to learn more about how to answer the question. And our Dean Sol is going to be releasing a series of videos actually for, some of these prompts to sort of explain like what we hope to see in them. And so we want you to be able to get the information right from the source as clearly as possible, because these are supposed to be fun. And as I said before, we ask them because they are so valuable to our process. And the 3 questions that we ask, one is asking you to express gratitude to someone that you haven't had the chance to properly thank. This one came about for a couple of reasons. One is the tremendous wellness benefit that comes with expressing gratitude, which we know from amazing Penn researchers at the Center for Positive Psychology and other places. And the other is because to really be part of like a functioning society, you've got to be able to accept the influence of others. You've got to be able to know that you will have influence on others and to allow others to also be part of your story, right? And so we don't care if it's Beyonce, Taylor Swift, like, a pet, a person who's with us, a person who's no longer with us. Like, it doesn't matter. There's no rules about that. But we want to know, when you consider the concept of gratitude, who would you like to express that to? There is very few ways, and maybe only one way to do gratitude wrong. And that way is to subtly try to thank yourself by thanking someone else. And so if you find yourself going down the trap of thanking someone else for making you so great, you should stop and reconsider that approach. But otherwise, there's really, no other advice that I would have other than to just truly like, we hope that the moment brings you a little bit of like de-stress, that it brings you a little bit of like with a wellness benefit, and that you're able to pay it forward. We also kind of like the great social experiment it is to have over 70,000 people put positive energy into the world every year, and see that kind of ripple. The next question that we ask is about community. And so again, community is a complex thing, and we want you to consider what that means to you. It can be something that can challenge us, can nurture us, can support us, sustain us, right? It's all of these things. And but it requires kind of like active participation. And so we ask students to think about how do they see themselves contributing to Penn's community. And what that might mean for you, it could be, finding spaces of affinity, finding things that allow you to share interests, finding things that allow you to further, things you're already interested in, or, things that you're already engaged in, right? Or it could be trying something new. And there's, again, no right or wrong answer. We're truly we want students to realize that when they come to Penn, it's not just going to be about the learning. It's going to be about the living. It's going to be about like the being a part of the fabric of the place. Like every class changes the university. And we want to know what that might look like, from you. And we're not holding you to it, but we just want to know like right now, like what appeals to you. And then last, we're asking, given the school, the undergraduate school that you've chosen, it's really getting at why did you make that choice? And the reason for this is because while we're not attached to majors, we actually don't even ask majors for anything except engineering. And the only reason we ask for it in engineering is because you need to declare your major by your second year. So it's helpful that you've started to think about it going into your first year. But again, you're not held to it. You could still change your mind, and we don't admit by major. So what we're really asking though is like, how do you want to spend your time as a learner? And I think my number one piece of advice to students there is that think about, and this is not just true for Penn, I think it's true for anywhere. Look at the curriculum, look at the first year curriculum, look at the structure of how your time as a learner is going to be spent your first year and over 4 years, and think, does that sound interesting to me? Is that how I like to learn? And an example I'll give, right, is we have a lot of students these days who are interested in AI or computer science. And I was like, great, go ahead and look at the structure of the engineering curriculum. And then they're like, oh, it's a lot of math. Oh, it's a lot of physics. I'm like, yes, but there's also data science in the College of Arts and Sciences. There's an AI concentration in Wharton, and there's also all of these other things. So I think that what we hope is just that students have done the work of really being honest about who are they as a learner, how do they want to spend their time as a learner, and tell us why.
Thank you. I appreciate that you mentioned AI as a topic that students are interested in, because wow, were our registrants and including our attendees very interested in that. We already had a few questions about AI come in. So one day in the future, hopefully some Penn students who very capably answered that prompt will be able to help us with this. But for now, can you speak a bit to how Penn is considering AI in the admission process? So a couple layers to that. Are you using it at any stage of your review?
Mm-hmm.
Are you making a statement about how you permit or want students to use it in their applications? We've seen already statements ranging from encouraging it in certain capacities or even requiring it, all the way down to absolutely prohibiting it. So where is Penn at the moment with their policy for students, and where are they in the admission review process with AI?
So I'll start just simply first. We don't use it in our admissions process. I think that if anything, we'll continue to explore, as probably anybody is, rolling out technologies that maybe could use, could better meet the needs of like answering questions or getting information accurately to prospective audiences. I think that that's some promise, right? To like really personalize information
Right.
and connect you to the right places in a large, complex institution. But no, we don't use it at all in our admissions process. There's at any rate, it just our process is working. B, we don't have trouble managing the volume, and C, like there's not necessarily something that we hope that it would. I could see like some sort of like document processing feature that maybe could help, but like the only benefit that I think we would be looking at is like, did it bring information to applicants faster about the status of their materials or something like that? Like, did it alleviate stress on somebody's end? But at any rate, no, we don't use it in our process. And we don't have a separate a statement regarding AI. We actually have one very important statement, however, that is our own attestation that is separate from the common application. So you sign the common application attestation, and then you sign, usually for every college or university that you're going to apply to, they have their own kind of statement of integrity, of expectation of integrity in the process that you're signing. And ours is really intentionally worded because, to be honest with you, AI is just an extension of, I think, continued. There's always something. There's always some tool, some resource, something that students could look to for help in the process. And while this one might be more quickly accessible and universally accessible, it doesn't necessarily change the fact that when you apply to college, this work has to be your own, and this information has to be your own. And so the attestation is really, that's what it addresses. And I will tell you, and I think that this is true. This was true when parents had heavy hands in essays. This was true when, everybody got the same guidebook and, read the same thing, right? Like, but now it's even more true because of AI, where if you use it for parts of your application, it doesn't sound like you. Like if you use it and take wholesale what it has delivered back to you, I can guarantee 100% that that is going to be a very choppy experience for our committee to assess, because there's going to be parts where you're like, that's disconnected from this, and isn't this a different tone? Or like, I don't know, like, are you getting this? Like, it's hard to get a sense of this student because here's what the teachers say, and then here's what this was, and then you got these grades over here, and then this doesn't make sense, and this is how they're spending their time, but yet, like, and you just don't feel like you've actually gotten much of like a cohesive, like clear view of someone. And so it hinders the conversation that you might have. So I think that that's the biggest caveat that I have around it, is that it totally, absolutely 1000% to help you organize your thoughts, to help you think about things that you didn't consider, to like introduce ideas, but you've got to make it your own, and you've got to zoom out and be like, does this actually like sound like me? Like if somebody was to spend an hour with me, would this match like with the things that they're about to read? Because you've got other people writing on your behalf from recommendations. You've got the context of how you've already spent 4 years of your time and energy. You've got many different places where you're asked to answer different kinds of questions. And it's got to be like, it does you no good to have something be the product of something that really isn't yours. That even if it was your idea of like what you typed into the tool, the product of it, if it is so far removed from how you would usually communicate that, it's not gonna be a cohesive thing. So I think that that's my only caveat. And that's true, again, like I said, regarding of if you have your sister, your parents, your whoever, right, like edit your stuff, is that like, it's not theirs, right? And so it's much more important that like you read something and you're like, I don't write like that. Like, I wouldn't use that word. I would use this word. That helps us get a sense of you, and it will feel a lot less disconnected if you do that.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you said, like this is sort of an old problem in new
Yeah,
fancy tech clothes.
totally.
Um,
Totally.
and it just, it's just becoming so much easier to use. But I appreciate the way that you talked about sort of that, a responsible balance of using it for idea organization and generation. Um,
We
and I
are seeing, I will say that we are seeing more teachers use it. Like, so let's say like, that there's like that math teacher that like or English teacher, that's who it usually is, that everybody at the school asks for a letter of recommendation and they have to write a lot. We will sometimes see like a little disclaimer at the bottom of a letter that says, I use this with the assistance of AI. The thoughts and sentiments are my own. And
Wow,
that has
interesting.
been fascinating to me. And that's great. It's fine. It's fine.
Right.
It's not like, I love that actually, because then if you see, if you're wondering why like the style is different from one year to the next or something like that, it helps explain it.
Yeah.
That's really
Well,
interesting.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, it's just really interesting to
Yeah, I
see it
hadn't
come up with that disclaimer.
Yeah.
disclaimer, yeah.
I feel like also similarly with recommendation letters, I mean, so many counselors have so many to write that whether it's bullet points or not particularly eloquent, sometimes students will say, oh, I'm going to ask my English teacher to write because they're going to be a better writer than my math teacher or my foreign language teacher. They just make this assumption,
Yeah.
or maybe they've heard that. And I always say, don't worry how well written it is. It's just more what, the
Right.
meat of what they're going to say, even if they
Exactly.
have to bullet point it, even if it's poorly written, as long as the substance is there. Like, don't pick who you think's a better, more flowery writer. Um, actually for you, better, shorter, better,
Yes.
Yeah. So Jordan, with all of that and with considering um, Penn's review process specifically, but just the trends of where things are heading, do you foresee other aspects of the application becoming more important or used differently as we sort of accept wherever essays are headed in the age of AI? I think all of us here,
Mhm.
I think, you know, feel that tension of like, no, it still needs to be your writing. And we still need to see you. And if you're mentioning our shared humanity being the most compelling quality in writing, but the reality that we're living in is that we're using machines in different ways that even a year ago
Yeah.
we weren't considering. So as you think about that, as we're talking about what makes an effective college essay and the essay's role in the larger admission process, do you see other things becoming more important, becoming considered differently in that review process?
Um, It's an interesting thing that I think that every institution would have to answer, like, is there a problem that you're going to have to try to solve for, right? And then that might shape like what approach that you take. Personally, I do think that one of the things that we try, I'm going to be completely honest, that verification is, I think, becoming an issue, and it has nothing to do with AI. I think that AI doesn't help necessarily, but I think that authenticity of documents, of credentials, of research, of stuff like that. Like, I think that we're increasingly skeptical of things that cannot be verified, is how I would put it. And so, and I guess what I mean by that is that like, somebody has done like 20 different independent research projects. It's, well, we can't really do much with that. So it's not that it works against you. It's just that it's then becomes something that like, what does it really mean? Because like, we don't know how to contextualize it, if that makes any sense. So I do think that the burden of making sure that like we can rely on the information that we are receiving becomes really important. And back to the concept of an attestation, we actually are starting to add that into like the information session that we provide to families, because it's a question that's on the application that I doubt anybody gives any thought to. But yet it's probably the most important question that's asked, because it's basically laying out for you expectations, community standards, and things that you're going to be held to throughout the application process and through when you enroll, right? It's like the very first time that you're getting like these like rules of the road from the institution that you're seeking to join. And violations of that are pretty serious, right? And so I think that that is an area that I think that we will just be increasingly attentive to. And also of like, do our requirements get us the information we need? And is there anything we're asking or anything that we're requiring that actually isn't valuable and we can get rid of that? This year, we actually reduced the number of recommendations, for example, that we're asking for from 3 to 2. And part of that is because, you know, we found that your counselor and a teacher actually do a really good job of getting us the information that we need for 99% of students.
That's actually a good segue to the additional information section. This sort of idea, kind of similar to the sort of idea of perfection, the idea of more is better. Let me give them more recommendations. Let me give them more information. Let me also send a resume. Could you just speak to what, the additional information section, which has undergone a little bit of change this year, but the additional information section and just this general idea of submitting more materials, be it I play piano, let me put a piano portfolio like together and send it to them. Can you just speak to that kind of, what your thoughts are on these ways that students can give more and when they should maybe think, hey, I should use the application as presented?
Yeah. We, first of all, like, even though I just said something about verification, we believe you is the other thing that I should say. And so it's kind of like for everything that you do, you don't need to show us the proof. It's what I more mean by that is that like if somebody's, what I had basically meant was that if somebody's like everything that they're trying to establish to make a case for why they should be admitted is something that like nobody has ever seen them do and it's solitary and it's like no like then that becomes a little bit tough. But for the most part, like understand that like we trust that you are going into this upholding the integrity of the process. And so you don't have to like double down on the things that you've already shared. You can rest assured that we got it. Like we picked that up the first time you mentioned it. We picked that up when you dropped that link over here. We picked it up when you wrote about it in your, activity section. And, we're good. We got it. And so more honestly becomes like a distraction. And it's most often, I think, like a watering down sometime, right? And so I think very judicious and only include something when it's adding something that is not included anywhere else. I always used to like to zoom out and kind of give students I would do this thing called a post-it note exercise where I would give them like 5 to 6 post-it notes. I would say, give one to each person whose opinions you value and ask them to write something that comes to mind when they think of you. Gather them back. And sometimes it'll be a word, sometimes it'll be a phrase, sometimes it'll be an anecdote, but you get these things back and you think, okay, where am I going to fit these in my application? Because what you're going to get back, it's not going to be top goal scorer. It's not going to be honor roll student. It's not going to be like brilliant researcher. It's going to be how you make people feel, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I think you should find to interject. So somebody to kind of like endorse you from a perspective of saying like, yes, they've done this is not valuable, but somebody who can speak to character elements or skills or something that like they have uniquely observed is useful. Art, great, but be aware that you're not applying, when you apply to Penn and places like it, you're not applying to like a conservatory environment and you're not applying to anything that's portfolio driven. So actually, the number one piece of advice that we give students is find somewhere in the requirements to fit this because it's just going to be more easily absorbed and understood and used, I think, by admissions office when you've incorporated it into the required pieces. And a good example, I think, is that on the common application, there's an additional information section, like use it for whatever you want, but it's much more effective if you have like a web link or something there where your artwork is stored than if you try to upload a separate portfolio or something like that.
And you do click on, that was one of the
You
questions.
can't click on it. So
You
that's the
click
other
on the
thing, is try to
links.
make these short links, because I would love to lobby for the common application to make these actually clickable, but instead you kind of have to like copy and paste or type the URL in. So
Okay, yeah, thank you. Because I think it is, there's a kind of tendency to want to give you as much as possible. And we do also try to advise restraint and to remember what would be relevant and helpful to you. To your point about not applying to a conservatory or portfolio-based program, are the people who are on the other side going to be able to really make any sense and know how good the art
no, right.
is
And that's
relevant?
the other thing, is like, to be perfectly honest with you, is that like there's no difference between saying like I have spent my time and attention, developing my work as like a woodworker versus like I've spent my time and attention practicing the ukulele in my room versus I've spent my time and attention developing a meditation practice, right? Like all of these things are valuable, and we're not going to look for like, yes, but how well do you meditate? Like, like how many songs can you play on the ukulele? Like, it's not going to be what we do.
Right, right. That's super helpful. Thank you.
I will add that I think like that question of the portfolio obviously varies a lot from school to school, as you noted, like that Penn is not a conservatory-based program and that there's a broad spectrum. So as always, make sure you're checking the requirements and recommendations and policies for each specific school, because even among like peer institutions, they might vary a bit when it comes to something specific like an art portfolio.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Jordan, we always wrap up by asking our guests to respond to one of their own supplemental essay questions, kind of as if you were applying today. And we would love for you to answer the thank you note question that you referenced earlier, which I love that. I just love it.
It's one of my
Yeah,
favorites
I
too.
mean, a lot of thought I know went in and research went into coming up with it, and it's always like a real joy to work with students on it, and it does just make you feel good and happy. So thank you for that. But I'll read the prompt just for our audience in case they're not familiar. This is needs a response of between 150 and 200 words, and the prompt is: write a short thank you note to someone you have not yet thanked and would like to acknowledge. And then in parentheses, it says, we encourage you to share this note with that person if possible and reflect on the experience. So Jordan, how would you respond if you were applying to Penn and working on this question?
Well, if I was applying to Penn, then I might change it, because at first I want to thank the woman who has been so kind to my son this summer in teaching him chess and making him feel a sense of belonging. But I think that had I met an applicant, I would probably have I would have written this to my 7th grade teacher who was super special to me. He actually recently passed. And I did have the chance to thank him when I was in college. I wrote him a letter updating him about what I was doing. But I wish that I had probably written another letter later on in life updating him about what I was doing, because when I needed help in a very confusing time when I was a junior in high school, he was there for me and reached out, and he created a place of learning where he treated everybody like an adult. He created a sense of wonder because there were animals all over his classroom. 7th grade, what a miserable time, right? Like middle school, horrible. And he was just this guy who was kind of like very straightforward and treated you like with just such forthcoming care and appreciation, and he would look at you and say things to you that made you feel so deeply seen. And I've carried that with me always. So thank you, Mr. Evans. Yeah.
Love it.
Lovely.
Love it. And like you said earlier, you know, people remember how you make them feel. And you know, you remember the people who make you feel certain ways. So it's a great, lovely thing. So thank you. On that note, we love to end there.
Thank you, Jordan.
On this note of gratitude, we want to thank you for joining us, for your transparency and for your and Penn's work in trying to make this process a bit more joyful and just a little less stressful, maybe,
more human.
for students and the thought that you put into it. So thank you.
Of course, of course.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much,
Thank you.
Jordan.
I hope it was helpful.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everybody, and thanks for joining.
Good night, everyone.